I get so frustrated by the notion that like asking for consent isn't sexy or that it's cringe. Saying, do you want me to do this or can I do this can be really sexy
It is
sometimes.
hot.
It's so nice to hear that. Like, oh, you want to do it to me? Like, yeah, great.
It's
Yes.
actually not cool for someone to react that way if you revoke consent. You say, oh, actually, I'm not feeling like that. And if your partner gives you the silent treatment or then treats you badly because you said that, that is abusive and it's not normal behavior.
Speaking up during sex, I think, is a radical act. It is an act of resistance. I know that it can feel really challenging and really hard to talk, but it doesn't have to be.
I didn't hear the other podcast, but I think we just made a very, very important piece of media.
Yeah. Setting boundaries, getting rejected, saying no, or changing your mind midway through sex. These things can feel awkward or even embarrassing. They shouldn't, but they do, and it's genuinely scary sometimes to feel like you're letting someone down or even exposing yourself to being rejected. But the truth is, learning how to communicate what we need and what we don't is the secret to healthier, happier relationships, both romantic and platonic. And part of this is discussing how to spot and express our own boundaries and then in turn, respecting them in others. So we're going to talk about all the ways consent can feel messy or confusing, whether it's navigating boundaries, withdrawing consent if you're not into it anymore, and breaking down this idea that consent is a mood killer. So how can we make sure consent feels natural, uplifting, and ongoing in our day-to-day lives? On the couch with me today is Georgia Grace, a sex educator who is normalizing the conversation around intimacy, sex, and relationships.
Hey.
Campbell Harrison, a professional sports climber and Olympian who uses his position as a queer athlete to advocate for women and the LGBTQIA+ community.
Hey, how's it going?
And Meissa Mason, a Wiradjuri, Gomeroi, and Awabakal woman, queer advocate and content creator.
Hi.
Thank you all for being here. We will get into the nitty-gritty of these conversations, and they can feel a bit scary and a bit awkward because they're very complex topics, and there are things that can feel a bit silly to say or ask because it might feel like it should be assumed knowledge and no one's really talking about it. So in the interest of setting the tone for the podcast, if there are any questions that come to mind or that have come to mind that feel silly to ask, let's ask them now and hopefully revisit them at some point. I might start with you, Georgia.
Do you think that we should reframe the idea when someone says no to you, that's about getting rejected?
Okay, yes.
I wanted to know what is nonverbal consent and is nonverbal consent even a thing?
Right, that'll be very interesting to unpack. And Meissa, how about you?
Kind of on the opposite to that, I wanted to discuss more kind of upfront communication when discussing consent. I'm a very upfront kind of person when I communicate, but I find most people find that very abrupt. So how to navigate other people receiving very direct communication in terms of consent and keeping the mood and the vibe, I guess, while you do that.
Absolutely. All right, I look forward to coming back to all of those and seeing if we've answered them at some point. I think it's a great place to start in talking about boundaries and what they are and what they aren't. We spoke about this in another podcast, but the Jonah Hill example where it was revealed that the boundaries he set were sort of dictating whether his girlfriend at the time could go surfing with men, and he was claiming that that was a boundary. So, Georgia, do you mind letting us know what an actual boundary is?
So a boundary is a request or something that we set in relation to someone or something else. Often it follows this process of feeling into a need or a want or a desire, something that will be useful for us, and communicating that or making it happen. I think it's really important that we distinguish the difference between a boundary and asserting control over someone, because often we can hear this talk or these ideas weaponized against people, and then it kind of backs them into a corner. And if you hear someone say, this is my boundary, you have to do this for me, it feels really hard because I think a lot of people want to be respectful and kind to their partners. So that's why this Jonah Hill example is so distressing, because he has done a lot of his own therapy and I think he has a lot of the language and the tools to use. And in this case, we saw a request that he was making for his partner to not. She was a professional surfer, right?
Yeah.
She was a professional surfer and model,
Yeah.
already.
Yes, yeah, and requesting that she wouldn't go out and surf in an ocean with men. and that she wouldn't wear specific bikinis. And to frame that as that makes me uncomfortable that you were in that context and you were wearing that thing and this is a boundary. Instead, what could be a useful way to approach it is, hey, I'm noticing an insecurity in me, or I'm noticing my own jealousy when you're out there. I recognize that that's my stuff because this is your career and this is your body. So I'm going to take that jealousy and that insecurity and I'm going to work on it.
And just to stay with you for a little bit longer, Georgia, what does a boundary look like in a sexual context?
Yeah, so a boundary could look like many different things. And that might be, hey, I really want to connect with you sexually tonight, but I don't want to take our clothes off. Is there something that we could do on the couch? Or it could be, I know that it's a Tuesday night and this is usually our night that we have just the two of us, but actually I'm really tired and I don't think I can be sexual right now. Or it could be, we're kissing and our clothes are off, and halfway through I realize that actually this isn't feeling good. Maybe it's because I'm really in my head or I'm stressed or something's happened and I just don't want to do this anymore. Can we pause? Can we stop? But then it could also be on a first date. Like, I know we've just kissed and I know we were about to walk home together, but actually I don't want to go home with you anymore.
Yeah, it's incredible to hear you articulate it so well, and it makes it so easy to understand. I always find whenever I'm listening to podcasts or watching videos or reels or whatever it may be, that hearing examples is so helpful, like healthy examples. So without putting too much pressure on Campbell or you or Meissa, can you think of a time that you set a healthy boundary and how did it feel?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I can think of so many times. I think part of growing up, part of being an adult, whether it's a very short-term relationship or a very long-term relationship, I think there are a lot of instances that you have to set boundaries or that you do set boundaries. And I'm very lucky that I'm with somebody that I feel very comfortable setting those boundaries. But yeah, there are absolutely times where we've been doing something and I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. And maybe we do something else. Maybe we don't do anything at all, or I really want to have sex and my partner doesn't. And, having to navigate their boundaries as well and understanding that, it doesn't elicit some kind of lack of connection, that there are a multitude of reasons why someone might be asserting a boundary or not giving consent for whatever reason, in whatever circumstance, I think navigating that is very much a part of growing up.
Fantastic, Campbell. Thank you, by the way. And how about you, Meissa?
Outside of a kind of relationship context, I personally lately have been setting a lot of boundaries with family members.
Okay.
So not obviously like a partner, but I think it can still have some of the same expectations of what you should do for a person because they're a family member, or I don't know, just I would just say expectations, really. Expectations and what you should do or how you should behave. But I think as well, now being an adult, I'm kind of learning more how to navigate that rather than being a kid when people just tell you where you have to go, what you have to do or whatever.
Yeah.
And having the agency to decide for myself what I do or don't want to do, or how I react to something, or whatever the situation may be, but setting healthy boundaries with family members as well.
How do you go about identifying yourself that, oh, this is a boundary I need to set?
I'll give an easy example, and I did have this recently. But I have a lot of family members sometimes ask me for loans, and I had to put a boundary in place for one of my uncles, and I was like, you're asking me for loans too much, too often, and I can't give you money this often. And I feel like it's getting to the point where you're asking an unreasonable amount and that it's not a regular amount. And he was very fine with it. He's like, oh, I'm sorry, like my baby, I didn't mean to treat you like that. He was very lovely about it. But I was very direct in how I spoke to him, and I was like, I'm so sorry, but like I can't be giving you money this often and you're asking me too much that I don't think it's a reasonable amount or a respectful amount. And I had to put that boundary in place. And I have done that with other family members who never pay me back. I don't give them loans no more. But,
Yeah.
but I think some stuff like that outside of relationships, it's another example of like when you have to set boundaries with somebody and it might be a bit awkward. And obviously the dynamic was a bit different because it's like my uncle as well. But it's still, you still have boundaries with non-relationship people or non-partners.
Yeah, absolutely. And same sort of question to you, Campbell. How do you go about identifying them internally before they need to be set?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky. I think, unfortunately, in a lot of instances, we learn our boundaries from when they're pushed. I think sometimes we learn our boundaries in hindsight of a situation. And that's definitely unfortunate, but I think it goes to show that exercising boundaries it's like exercising a muscle. You kind of have to learn and practice, and you get a little bit better at it over time. As far as identifying them. It's a lot of introspection, I guess. But yeah, I think yeah, it takes time, and I think having strong boundaries and being able to express those is a really powerful thing. I always say that like I'm not a yes man. I have no trouble saying no to something I don't want to do, but you know that when I say yes to doing something for you, it's because I want to do it. I'm
Yeah.
I'm expressing my love or my gratitude or whatever for you. If I'm doing something for you, if I'm having sex with you, like when I'm saying yes to these things, it comes from a genuine place, because if I didn't want to do it, I wouldn't. I'd say no. And I think that's maybe another way of framing boundaries and saying no to things, is that um, yeah, you're showing how significant it is when you do say yes.
Yeah, that's a really good way to look at it, actually. When you're working with clients, do you find that most people figure out where their boundaries are through experience, or like, something's happened to them and they've gone, oh my gosh, okay, I can't let that happen again, or is it through introspection?
Yeah, I guess it's all of that really.
Hmm.
And I think that it kind of depends on the area that we're working with. So it would be a different approach if someone is living and working with trauma and someone isn't. So if there's trauma present, what we really need to do is learn about what they can do to create a safe space for them to really practice and recognize what it feels like to be in a safe space. Because often, if it is sexual trauma, then the concept or the experience of sex can feel incredibly triggering. So that might be that they need to take sex off the cards and just come back to learning what feels safe. And that might even just be spending time in their body. And that might be solo time, just recognizing sensations in their body. But then it's kind of different if we're not living and working with trauma and they're not going to be out of their window of tolerance, or they're not going to be triggered by sex. Sometimes what can happen is sort of we've learned um, you don't know that you've met a boundary till you've actually met it. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad or traumatizing or triggering thing. Like it certainly can be, but it can happen during sex all the time where someone might say something and you think, "Oh, I actually didn't want to be called that during sex," or
Mm.
they might touch a body part and you don't necessarily like it, or it might be a certain, pressure or speed. So it is okay if we figure out boundaries sort of as we're going. But then I guess when we're learning to practice it, I think a lot of that can be practiced outside of a sexual context. And we really live in a world that doesn't support us to assert boundaries. I think many of us grow up and when we're a young person, we might be told to go hug or kiss auntie and uncle or
Yeah.
grandma or grandpa. And, even if we don't want to, it'll be, it's the rude thing to not go and do that. So that's sort of ingrained in us from a really young age that we don't have agency and we should just do things to make people happy. So
Mhm.
that's a big part of, and I think that's a big barrier that people face in asserting their boundaries, is the fear that they might upset someone and upset the person who they probably want to make feel really good, which is the person who they're having sex with or people.
Do you feel like, Campbell, in that example of childhood, I think is such a relatable one. Do you feel like there are gender differences in like the way we're socialized, being brought up in those contexts?
Yeah, I guess it's probably the things that we're expected to say yes to doing are different between boys and girls. I guess girls are often, expected to dress a certain way, and boys are expected to dress a certain way. And if you are to assert boundaries over those sort of like assumed gender expectations, it can be quite controversial and sometimes hard for people to accept. But it all sort of comes under that same umbrella of
Yeah.
what you're comfortable doing.
Absolutely. Meissa, how about the experience? And you don't have to think of a specific example, but when someone sets a boundary with you, how does that feel? And how do you react to it from your experience?
This will be a theme throughout this whole thing, but I'm a big fan of direct communication.
Mm.
So I do really like if someone, like I never obviously want to cross someone's boundaries, but if I ever did, or I did something that they would like differently or whatever, I would very much like to be told. And I like direct communication. I would tell someone if I trusted them, obviously, like I would tell them as well. So I would react positively. I'd be like, thank you for sharing that with me. And also thank you for being so direct. Like I feel like I've had probably friends in the past in high school and stuff, not where I've like broken a boundary, but I feel like they were just not very upfront with a lot of their communication, and it had issues sometimes. So I would very much appreciate vocalizing boundaries and having that clear, well, just the clear communication, so we both know we're on the same page. I know that you don't like that, I will not do that again. Or I know that you didn't like that phrasing or something, whether it's big or small. I would like to be told, and I would react in that way, and I would let them know. I'd say, thank you for telling me this. And if there's anything else, feel free to vocalize.
Yeah, I can relate to that so much. Like finding out after the fact that you made a joke that was too far for somebody, or that you did something that they didn't like. Like finding out after the fact that you pushed that boundary really hurts and really sucks, and you know wish you could go back and change it. And in that sense, it's like it really is a kindness to communicate your boundaries with other people, and it is a sign of respect. And I think I would like to know, you know, as quickly as relevantly possible, you know, that I don't want to push anybody else's buttons in a way that isn't fun and friendly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's really, I mean, I really admire people who set boundaries. Like, even if it's leaving dinner and a friend is like, I'm tired, let's go.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, that is so cool. Because, you know, I can also see in myself where I might sort of delay it a bit, or just, you
Yeah.
know, be like, oh, is this too much to ask? Like, and that's a big thing that I've really had to work on in communicating my own boundaries. So when I see someone assert them or tell me what they want, it really means that, like, I feel like I can really trust them. That,
Yeah.
as you were saying before, like, if we're going into something, I know they're as excited about it, and as soon as they're not excited, then it'll end, and that's great, and we'll all feel good at the end of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like this is going to sound obvious, but respecting boundaries that are set, you know, with you is rooted in respect in general. And Meissa, do you find that, because obviously in some cultures and First Nations people in particular, you know, respect is sort of everything, respect for yourself, your family, and for your elders. Does that deep sense of respect reflect the way you respond to boundaries?
I would say
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely kind of how you're describing as underpins a lot of the way I navigate the world in general. So it definitely, I think, is a large aspect of how I navigate relationships too, whether they're like sexual or partners or friends or family.
Why do we think it can be so hard for some people to set boundaries, Campbell? Like, how could we practice, you know, normalizing standing up for our own limits?
I mean, I think no one wants to. We don't want to let people down.
Yeah.
And I think it all kind of just comes back to that, really. It's like, oh, someone's really excited about something and you don't want to let them down, so
Yeah.
you do it anyway, or you get caught up in the moment and you do it anyway. And I think that something that's so important is maybe just like having that conversation earlier in the piece, like before things get hot and heavy, before things get crazy, or before you get stuck into something potentially that could become uncomfortable. Like some people fear that consent or talking about consent will be a mood killer. But maybe you can kind of, you know, consent can be pulled at any time, but maybe you can have the conversation at the start. That's like, if at any point in time you want to stop or you want to change things, like, please tell me it's a safe space to do so. And then people will know that you can revoke and change how you feel at any time. And that, you know, you can let people know you're not going to be letting me down. I want you to have a good experience with this. Or if you're asking for a favor, I only want you to do this for me if you can, if you want to, maybe at a time when you're not asking for a favor. So the precedent is set.
Yeah.
And then it just makes the whole process a whole lot easier when you get around to it.
I feel like that experience of not wanting to let people down is exacerbated so much more when it's in like a sexual context, because then my experience that it feels so much more personal. Like, oh my God, this person is going to I think they're not attractive, or I'm not attracted to them. And I always feel like I don't want to make them feel that way. Do you see a lot of that in your work?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. That's one of the big ones that people will share, which is, I really am attracted to this person and I want it and I want to have a good time with them, but for whatever reason, I just don't in this moment. And I'm nervous or worried that by me saying no or pause or stop, they are going to think it's about them being a bad lover or me not being attracted to them. But this could also come from messaging that they have received from their partner as well. So what might happen, or what might have happened in the past, they might have said, hey, look, I'm just not really into it. And then the partner feels rejected and sad. And then they might just be like, okay, and physically respect it and stop. But then they might turn over and curl in a ball, or they might sort of storm out the room, or they might not talk to them for a few days. So whilst they didn't continue having sex, there were repercussions after that led to more disconnection. And so someone in that moment might be thinking, is it just easier for me to continue this for a few more minutes and to endure this rather than to voice it, because I know that the next hour or days is going to feel really disconnected and uncomfortable. And that's kind of what is going through their mind often. Has it any
Mhm.
those ideas ever come up before? Or
While we're on that, can we kind of label those behaviors as abusive?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
not as like, oh, my boyfriend just acts this way. Like, it's actually
Mm.
not cool for someone to react that way if you revoke consent. You say, oh, actually, I'm not feeling like that. And if your boyfriend gives you the silent treatment, or partner, if any partner gives you the silent treatment, or then ignores you or treats you badly because you said that, that is abusive and it's not normal behavior.
Yeah,
And I think we should very much label that, obviously, right now.
absolutely. Yeah, great call.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because we are talking a lot about like how to communicate your boundaries in a friendly way, in a nice way, but also sometimes like if your partner is going to respond to your boundaries in an abusive way like that, I think it's perfectly okay to take the friendliness of it out of the equation. If it's a safe space, you can just. I think it's the safest or healthiest option in those instances might be to disengage from that relationship and
Yeah.
to pull things away. You don't always have to be. If you're not being respected, you don't have to be a people pleaser. You can
Yeah.
as I said, when it's safe, step away. You don't have to be conserving the feelings of the other person if they're not conserving yours.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So when we are talking about boundary setting, what we will be doing is we will be looking at the verbal and non-verbal ways to respond to a boundary as well. Because as you mentioned, like we could give language or we could give different approaches for how to actually communicate a boundary. But if that isn't being met in a safe environment, a respectful environment, that language is useless to this person. So we need to work with everyone. And I think that a lot of people wouldn't recognize it
Yeah.
as abusive or coercive or manipulative, um, because they're so consumed by their own shame or their own rejection or their own sadness. And they don't see the harm that they can be causing to this person. They don't see how they are actually not creating a safe environment within their relationship, for allowing this person to be able to communicate consent.
And I think it's okay to pull yourself up on being the person who is being upset because they've been rejected. Like it's not acceptable behavior, and you do need to be accountable for it. But I think if you're learning and you look back at these experiences, where you're like, oh, I was kind of not very nice that time that my partner told me they didn't want to have sex for the first time, and learn and apologize and try to do better next time. I think we all make mistakes. I think that's really important. Not to write yourself off. Like you can learn from that experience and hopefully show more empathy and kindness in the future.
That's like the best case scenario. It's like the introspection after.
Yeah.
Everyone should have
I
that.
think we're so
think about it
afraid of
more.
introspection, of
Yeah.
like pinning ourselves as the bad guy sometimes. But like, some mistakes are really egregious, but for the most part, it's okay to make mistakes as long as you learn from them afterwards.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful way to look at it. And I feel like with what you pointed out, Meissa, like those abusive behaviors, and if you're not setting a boundary out of fear that they might happen, then obviously, and you continue engaging in the sexual activity, then there's no consent there. What if, and this maybe it's a bit of a personal question, I might need to book an actual session with you, Georgia, but what if you don't assert that boundary, not out of fear that that person's going to have those abusive responses, but just back to that, I don't want to upset them. I personally would feel then kind of weird saying that then I've put myself in a position where I've had sex without consent. But I guess I'm maybe asking, like, what's your advice if you have that kind of, you blame yourself for not setting the boundary?
Yeah, well, firstly, I would bring compassion, a lot of compassion to that, because, you would do it, whoever we're talking to, were doing whatever you were doing in that situation probably because you haven't had access to sex education, because not many of us have, or consent education, but also because a lot of the education that we did receive also wasn't pleasure focused. So often we do have these messages that around, endure it, or, it's okay if it's kind of painful, or some,
It'll be over soon. Like,
yeah, don't worry, just, make them happy. And I think that, like, even like glossy magazines would often have messages like, you need to do this for your partner X amount of times to keep them happy. So I think rather than blaming yourself, let's bring compassion, and also, like, let's zoom out as to all of the other reasons as to why you may have stayed with an experience. I also think it's probably useful to make a distinction between wanting and willing, and this is still within consent. So a consensual sexual experience. So let's just park the I endured and come back to, like, you're consenting. There are two different ways that we can have sex, or we can touch and receive touch. And one of them is wanting. So I am wanting this and it is for me. So I have asked for a specific kind of touch. I really, really want to receive it, and that's for me. But then we have willing, and that is, I'm still consenting, but I'm doing it for you. I'm giving you a kind of touch. I'm giving you a kind of an experience. And that can still feel good for me. Like, I can feel excited and pleasure and useful and all of those things. But it allows us to think about different kinds of touch or different kinds of sexual experiences, and the roles we may be playing. But then let's also park that idea, and that's kind of different to, I guess, if we are talking about, what do I notice when I've endured it? And I think that that's a really important conversation to have. And that might be, hey, I noticed that last night I actually continued having sex even though I was distracted, or even though I wasn't into it. And I really want to talk with you about it, because I know you don't want me to endure, but these are certain cues that maybe you could look out for, or maybe these are ways that we could check in during, so that we're both just really excited, or we're both into it the whole time.
That is really helpful. It's such a thoughtful response. Thank you. It's made me feel a lot better.
Oh, good.
To kind of then come back to the abusive responses, Meissa, do you think there are gender differences in the way boys and girls are socialized that then impact how they either respect or dismiss boundaries?
I definitely think so. I think women have been historically socialized to please their male partners. So, like, to give a more extreme example, like, rape used to be okay in marriages because you were married and your husband could do whatever they wanted to because you're married and you have that now. That is obviously not okay. And in recent times, or more recent times, we have more conversations about how that's not okay. And you can be charged for doing that to your partner, which is before you actually couldn't have. But there's a very big culture around, like, women having to service their partners, both sexually and non-sexually. But there's a very big culture around that. And I think a lot of women do just, like, endure a lot of their relations with their partner, and, like, it's expected. And I think even in today's environment, a lot of men still expect that kind of service from their partners, and they think, well, you're my girlfriend, you should be doing this. This is part of your role as my girlfriend. And I think that type of socialization isn't as prevalent for men, and historically it hasn't been.
Oh yeah, 100%. I feel like in high school, it was very, very common, if not expected, that um, that a girl would give a boy, various levels of sexual touch before she would ever receive, like, sort of the same
Yeah.
equivalent sexual touch. I think there was an expectation that girls will do things to boys, and then, like, years later is when it's, like, acceptable for girls to have to receive sexual pleasure, like, in the same equivalent way. So I think in that sense, yeah, very gendered.
Brilliantly put answers from both of you. Thank you. Can I ask, if you're comfortable, what does that look like in queer relationships?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it can still exist. I think
Oh,
that,
yeah.
yeah, it's certainly, we are all flawed in many ways, and it, I guess it depends on the dynamic and it depends on the relationship structure as well. So some people still do have different dynamics or different power dynamics in their relationships. But then I think one thing that is interesting in queer sex and queer relationships that's important to keep our minds to is that often we're challenged to move beyond heteronormative ways of thinking about sex. So, heteronormative ways of thinking about sex is often we kiss a bit, we touch a bit, and then we go into penetration. Now, that narrative often serves a person with a penis, and that is like a very sort of clear image and structure around the way that you can have sex. But in queer sex, often what you have to do is you really have to reimagine it. And because many of us weren't given any queer sex education, you kind of have to create your own definition of sex. You have to really explore it. So I guess when it comes to different ways of experiencing pleasure and making sure each person feels like they're experiencing as much pleasure as their partner, you are sort of encouraged to or allowed to do that because the narrative is different. But then again, that can lead to a different kind of pressure when we have this sort of reciprocal idea, like I'll do you, then you do me, which is it still can be quite orgasm focused. And I know that a lot of people experience pressure to orgasm, and they're trying to make their orgasm or their pleasure about their partner because they want to make their partner feel good, and they know that if they come, their partner will feel good about themselves. So yeah, I think there are certainly nuances and there are certainly differences in I guess, the different types of pressure, or the different ways that you may experience pressure. But again, like queers are humans, and they will come with their own stuff as well.
Absolutely,
Yeah, I
yeah.
think in gay male spaces, it's really that notion of enduring is very, very common. Like that sex for the first time or the first few times, it will be painful, and sometimes it just hurts because it's, we're doing it a different way, and that's just what you have to deal with. And it takes so many gay men far too long to discover with the right people that it actually doesn't have to hurt at all. Not even, it doesn't have to hurt even a little bit. But I think there's just not enough messaging because, like you said, as little sex education as heterosexual individuals receive, queer individuals receive even less. Most of it comes from the internet, probably from pornography, which is a very, very narrow window into a very skewed version of what sex is. And so, yeah, I think there's just this expectation that you just do it and it's just going to be what it is, but actually doesn't have to be that way. You can take things a lot slower. And again, you can set those boundaries. You're still lovable just because there's, less queer people around. Maybe you don't see yourself in as many people around you, but you can like give yourself time. That's something, I mean, maybe I'm just projecting here because I think that's something I wish I'd afforded myself a little bit more, is that you don't have to just like jump in because you've fallen behind your peers.
Yeah. Thank you for that, both of you. I think maybe we'll move on now to a couple of misunderstandings about consent that can make us feel a bit scared to practice it or ask for it. And the first one is that consent is kind of cringe or a mood killer. And maybe you'll get your thoughts on this one straight off the bat, Meissa, because you were saying that you're a direct communicator. So how does that, play into consent being a quote unquote mood killer?
Well, I am a very direct communicator, but I also like to kind of have regular check-ins as you're going. So there isn't just the like at the beginning. You can ask things like, "Is this okay? Do you like this? Do you want to keep going? Should I do this differently? Do you want to try a different thing?" But asking a lot of things along the way to check in as well, so that if you are in the middle of something or you want to try something else, like it gives first of all the opportunity for them to say something, but also just as someone being with somebody, you're checking in that they do like this. I like to have little check-ins constantly. Like, all the time. And you can do those in, I guess, like being direct, but not being unsexy. You can still say it in a sexy way, or like, do you like this, in a sexy way, or like, do you want me to try a different thing or something? I think like communicating in that way can still be not a mood killer, but you can check in so that it gives someone an opportunity to revoke consent if they don't feel like saying it themselves. Because I think some people may have the thoughts but don't want to voice that. But if you ask, they may be more likely to say that, to be like, actually, yes, I don't like this position, or I do want to change this, or I want to stop now. But it gives them more opportunity to say something.
Yeah, and that's such a respectful thing to do. Yeah.
I get so frustrated by the notion that like asking for consent isn't sexy or that it's cringe, because like saying, do you want me to do this, or can I do this, can be really sexy sometimes.
It is hot.
It is. It's like I think you're young and you imagine being like, oh, do you want to do this thing?
Yeah.
And you're like, that sounds nasty. But it, like, when you're with a consenting partner, when you have those avenues of communication open between one another, and you ask them if they would like something from you, it can be very sexy. And I think it's far from cringe. And I think it's like
what's sexier than a partner that cares? Who's cares about that you're enjoying this, and that
I don't know, even just hearing them say it, like, it's just fun and like very free. It's cool.
Yeah. Like, I want to take your top off. Like, can I take your top off?
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't need to be clinical, even though I agree. Like,
Yeah.
we really need to move beyond this language that it is inherently unsexy, because without consent, it's not sex, it's assault. And also, I think everyone is putting way too much pressure on themselves to be sexy, and this like idea of like a sex god. What does that even mean? And I think that there's this image that we have that for sex to be really hot, it's just effortless and seamless, and you're rolling around the walls, and your clothes are falling off, and you're just perfectly being picked up and thrown on a couch, and you come at the same time, and you don't talk at all. And I think that this is just so not how sex
Realistic.
happens. Yeah.
No.
What movie scene just came to everyone's
Yeah.
mind?
I was thinking, I'm like, this sounds like a movie.
Yeah, something with
As-
Anne Hathaway.
As
Brad
much
Pitt
as
and
I'm
Angelina
saying, like,
Jolie.
as much as I'm being like, oh yeah, like asking for consent is sexy, also sometimes sex is really unsexy.
Yeah, exactly.
Sex can be kind of like gross, not in a way that's painful or uncomfortable, but yeah, it's like the awkwardness is just part of it.
Yeah.
It's just part of it.
And I think that that's the thing that makes it also fun and connecting. Like, when we laugh, that's a release as well. And when we're clunky, that's our humanness. And I think that when we're not trying to be Angelina Jolie, but instead when we're just trying to be who we are as a sexual person, I think that that's where you have the best sex of your life. So it is okay if you find it a bit clunky or awkward, or you don't know how to ask for the thing or say the thing in the right way, because there is not just one right way of doing it.
But like both of the examples, well, all the examples that you gave, like, do you mind if I do this to you, or I want to take your top off there? It's so nice to hear that. Like, oh, you want to do it to me?
Yeah,
oh,
lucky
great.
me.
Yes. So
You're like, I must look really good. Like,
we're clearly like all opposing to this idea that consent is a mood killer. So where do you think it comes from, Campbell?
oh my God, where does it come? I don't know. Like, I think it's from movies and from TV. I think and pornography. It's all these versions of sex that you see. I remember before actually having sex, like, I just really wanted like a clear idea of what it was like in the real world. Almost to the point where I wanted someone to just explain it to me sometimes, because it seemed like so stressful and so mysterious, because the versions of sex you see are on TV, where it's just this heat of the moment thing, and it starts and off they go, or pornography, where it's just again, it just off it goes, and it's someone using someone else's body, and we just don't really have very many real life experiences, which is like, as much as it can be uncomfortable to talk about sex or uncomfortable to hear about sex, I think like these conversations where you have like real people who've had sex in real life talking about the clunkiness and the awkwardness, because that's the stuff I think I would have liked to hear, because it would have taken so much pressure out of it.
Yeah.
If you're like, probably not going to know what you're doing half the time. Even once you've done it lots of times, there are going to be times you're like, I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And not feeling like, you have to step into this experience for the first time and be a pro.
I've had this overwhelming feeling the whole time of something you just said there. Like, I wish I heard this
Yeah.
when I was younger. And so it's so great to just be talking about it the way we are right now. Consent's obviously non-verbal too, Georgia. So I think we kind of get into your silly question, Campbell. And how can non-verbal signs of consent lift the mood? And how is understanding non-verbal signs of consent so important for people with disabilities or neurodivergency?
Or trauma as well. I
Yeah.
think that what is nonverbal basically? That's any time we are communicating without words. And so nonverbal communication could be our posture or our gestures or a tone that we're using. And I think some really important nonverbal things to look out for is like if someone's body stiffens or if they get really tight, if they're looking distracted or even disinterested. I know that some people can take that personally. They're like, my partner doesn't look like they want to be there. It's like they don't want me. Well, maybe that's a really good time to check in with them because they might not feel present, they might be disassociating, or they might not be comfortable. But then also, nonverbal cues can be really important and useful to tell someone what you do like and that you do want more. So again, it can be hand gestures, it can be pressure, it can be sort of emotion or a way that you move your body. But I guess an important thing to, as you were talking about disability and trauma and neurodivergence, what we really do need to do is have a conversation about how that will look different for each person. And we can't assume someone's body language means something. So if you are going into a sexual experience, to have an awareness around different nonverbal cues that maybe someone might need to be aware of, or even, asking, are there things that I should look out for? Or is there something that I should know to, as a way to kind of check in or to make sure it's still feeling good for all of us?
Wow. How amazing is Georgia? By the
Yeah,
way?
I know,
Amazing
right?
are
My
you
gosh.
all? Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, everybody's absolutely amazing. We have a lot of people that reach out to teach us consent with sort of the bright idea that there could be a tech solution for consent, like an app that, you tick a box and it's like a written contract that, once you've done that, all good to go for the rest of the experiences that might ensue moving forward. Why might this not be the best approach, do you think, Meissa?
Well, I think one issue with this is you're assuming that someone's consented for the rest of the night from one thing at the beginning, and you should be able to revoke consent at any time. So I don't know how that would work with an app. Would you have to get on your app and be like, I revoke? I don't understand. I think it's also adding kind of a more transactional kind of lens to something that's very personal. Like relationships and stuff are very personal. They're very non-transactional, or they shouldn't be, I don't think. I think that adds a kind of layer like that. It makes it more bureaucratic than actually caring about someone
Yeah.
and checking in. It kind of removes, I think, some of the agency or accountability of you should continue to check in and you should be worrying about, not worrying, but you should be aware of your partner. You should care about how they feel right now or in 10 minutes or in 20 minutes with what
Yeah.
you're doing. And you should keep thinking about that for yourself,
Yeah.
not just that, oh, they said they wanted to do this at the beginning.
As you're speaking about that, it makes me really think that this kind of system of consent is all about protecting the perpetrator
Yeah.
rather than speaking to the victim survivor and seeking and to understand what their experience was like. Because I guess I'm so opposed to this idea.
Oh.
I think it really misses out on an important awareness of the fawn response. So we've got the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn response. And not many people know about the fawn response, but that is when in the face of an aggressor or a threat or a fear, we try to appease the aggressor. And so victim survivors may say, why was I nice to the person who harmed me after? And that can feel really confronting in many ways. And I think about those who might go into a fawn response with this really ridiculous concept of the contract, to think that maybe, how would they have gone into a response that they were just trying to get through it, just trying to feel safe, even if what they were doing was no longer,
Yeah.
a
And
good
if someone
sexual
already feels that
experience.
way, like they're coerced or under duress, then they're likely to just, if you had an app, just say yes, and they don't feel that way. And then if you had that as like a legislative precedent, that person would be protected because they've signed this contract at the beginning. But that's not actually how people felt at the time, or wasn't real consent.
Yeah, and I think it goes back into what we were talking about before of like this idea of what does quote unquote normal sex look like? Normal sex often involves not going as far as you thought you were going to, or sometimes going further than you planned because you're in it, like, or just stopping something in the moment, changing to something else. Like those are also very, very normal parts of sex that you don't see in movies.
I think that's just such a light bulb moment for me, actually,
Mm.
that all of our conversations should focus on this idea that it's normal for sex to stop. It's
Yeah.
normal for it to not end in orgasm.
Hell, sometimes it's like, oh no, I'm running late.
Yeah.
We got to pick this up
Yes.
later.
Yeah, we've got to set a timer because I got to catch the bus.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I was
we'll
like, you know
finish-
what? I'm actually tired now after 30 minutes and I don't want to like finish, but we're done now.
Yes.
Yeah. While we're talking about the fact that consent is revocable, what are some casual ways that we can let a partner know? Whether it's in a relationship or it's just sort of, your first experience with someone that's, not necessarily aggressive, just a way to say, hey, I'm not into this anymore. Can we stop?
Could I gently challenge and say that we don't need to use language around it being casual, and that maybe you can just try to say it, and it doesn't need to be smooth and it doesn't need to be cool, but you could just say, hey, I'm not into that anymore, or hey, I'm realizing that I said yes to this thing and I'm not wanting to do that thing anymore. Or it might be, I don't know how to say this. The words aren't coming to me, and I think I just need to pause, and can we figure this out together? But I think if we can all really get on board with the idea that we don't need to be cool or casual or perfect
I think
about
this
it.
kind of relates to my question of like wording, and that I guess
Yeah.
you're saying you shouldn't have to worry. Obviously, unless it's like an unsafe situation for your safety, you shouldn't have to worry about how they take it, or that you should coddle their feelings in it. Like they shouldn't be upset if you revoke. So I guess you're kind of answering that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think you can also just say like, oh, this is different to what I thought it was going to be. Oh, this feels different to how I thought it was going to feel. It's not like oh, I thought you were attractive and I don't think you're attractive anymore. It's just like, oh, I thought I was really going to like that, but I'm actually not liking that. But I really liked that other thing we were doing. Like, not that you have to present an alternative. You can just stop. But if there was something that you were doing before that you really liked and your partner really liked it too, like, go back to that,
Yeah.
Yeah, and it could also be that they're giving you pleasure in some way, and it's just not feeling that good, or your arousal isn't building in your body. And you might say, can we pause, or can we try this different thing, or I'm not sure what I want. I actually need a moment to think about it. That these conversations can also really happen on like the first date as well. That, often people will say, I find the first kiss really awkward because I don't know what we're going to do. And are they leaning in or am I leaning in? But one way that you can get around that sort of awkwardness that people think it is to say, can I kiss you? Or I really want to kiss you. Can I kiss you? And that will sort of set the tone of communication. And I mean, if I were to hear that,
It's so cute. My heart would melt. My heart would melt if
Yes.
someone was like, can I kiss you? I'm like, okay. Me, little old me.
yeah. Yeah. And then it also gives you the opportunity to be like, yes or no. No,
Yeah.
I don't. And that is so much more comfortable than having to do,
Yeah.
the walk around it.
Outside of like the first kiss example, I was going to ask, then you went into that, which is great. But I think some of the communication you're talking about, people feel much more comfortable when they've had a long-term partner versus asking these questions on a one-night stand, or saying something like, can we try something else on a one-night stand? And I think like we should have normalized more of that type of consent checking in, even if you don't know that person that well. Because I think people don't want to upset them, or they don't know how they're going to react. And instead of feeling that way, as a people, as a society, the cultural shift, you shouldn't feel scared, even if you don't know them that well, to say these things to somebody or ask these things or like revoke consent.
What I am often thinking about is that when we create a culture of silence around talking about sex, that is an inherent way to control the language and to control certain people. And when we are examining this on a social, cultural, political level, the more silent people are, the easier it is to get away with causing harm. So, speaking up during sex, I think, is a radical act. It is an act of resistance against many other things that have told us to be good and silent. So I know that it can feel really challenging and really hard to talk, but it doesn't have to be. Even if it is a hookup and you're never going to see this person again, people will often say it feels hard to talk to this new person. But there is a way that you can, even on that one night, create that context of good communication. And that could be, I know you don't know my body because you're just meeting my body now. So I'm going to give you all the information so that you can give me pleasure.
I think we talk a lot about pleasure, but I think there are also like other facets of a sexual encounter that warrant discussion prior. So what contraception will or won't be used. Perhaps if you're like a male, same-sex male relationship or intimacy, are you using PrEP? If in the instance of a pregnancy, what are your beliefs and how that should be handled? I think these are important discussions that are often not being had, but do need to be had, whether you're going to be having sex one time or potentially multiple times. I think it's important to establish those beliefs, knowing that it's really important to me that we wear a condom and the condom stays on the whole time. Like that, those are definitely difficult conversations. That's probably in a lot of ways more difficult than some of the other stuff we suggested, but equally, if not more important, to be able to have those conversations. And if your partner isn't willing to have those conversations, that could be a sign of their sexual maturity, perhaps, and whether or not you would like to consent to having sex with this person.
This has been an amazing discussion, and I loved it kicked it off with your point that you shouldn't have to think about casual ways you should be able to say it and not have to consider that aspect of it. So to look at the flip side of that now, how should we, because we modeled some great ways and gave examples of how we can withdraw consent after that, and those little turns of phrase I actually think are so helpful for people. How can we model behavior now when consent's been withdrawn from us? And actually, this will probably come back to your silly question, Georgia, which is it just withdrawing consent or is it a rejection?
I think a good way to go about it would be to like reinforce their agency in the situation. Remove yourself from the activity that you're doing that they want to disengage from, and giving them the opportunity to express what they would like to do instead. And that might be like watching a movie. They might say, no, I'd like to leave, or I'd like you to leave, and that can be unfortunate, but reinforce the agency of the other person, remind them that it's a safe space and that if they'd like to do something else, then that could be just as fun. There are lots of fun activities two people can do that aren't sexual in nature. We can watch cat videos on TikTok together. TikTok time is my favorite couple activity, including the other activities for sure. So, maybe, reinforce their agency, I'd say.
I think a really great, if we want just 2 words, is thank you. Thanks for letting me know.
Yeah.
When someone says no, or I don't want to do that, or pause, say thank you, because that's a really great way to show them that you've heard it and that you've heard the boundary or you've heard the request. Also, by saying thank you, it tells ourselves that this is not a rejection necessarily. This is just this person telling me really important information. And if I say thank you to that, I'm acknowledging that this isn't necessarily about me being a bad lover or about, who I am. And it can often just give ourselves a beat between hearing it and the emotional response that we might have, and a moment to just sort of regulate ourselves. And then I think if we're looking at sort of nonverbal things to be aware of as well, it's okay if you feel hurt. It's okay if you feel sad. It's okay if that sexual experience was going to be really meaningful and you really wanted it and you're not getting what you want. That's okay. I think every single one of us will know that, and we will know that multiple times throughout our sexual careers or sexual relationships. However, can you be aware of how your body language is also communicating things? So the things we were talking about before, try not to, roll over and crawl into a ball. Be aware of the way you are engaging with them. Acknowledge that this probably felt really edgy, or it might not feel edgy for everyone, but I know that for a lot of people it can feel edgy and bring a whole lot of emotional things. And questions like that, which is, yeah, thank you for letting me know. If you don't want to do it, I don't want to do it either.
Yeah.
So, like,
Yeah,
what
thank
else
you
can
for
we
helping
do?
me not
Yeah.
make a mistake, because I don't
Yeah.
want to hurt your feelings. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So what can we do? Yeah, what do you want to do
Yeah.
instead?
And I think as well, like, to reduce that, finding something else to do to reduce that sense of, because in a lot of instances it's like, it's not a rejection, I just don't want to do this activity anymore.
Yeah.
And it's funny how sex seems to be the only activity that you're not allowed to disengage from. Like, if I'm eating a meal and I get full and I want to take 5 minutes to continue eating my meal,
Yeah.
I can do that. I put down my book for 10 minutes and do something else. But all of a sudden when it's sex, it's like, oh, if I say I want to stop now, it's like, well, then it's done and you suck and whatever. It's like,
Yeah.
actually, yeah, we could come back to it later or not. Let's play a video game and we can connect in this other way. It's just as meaningful.
Oh, killing it with the analogies. They make it so easy to understand.
I just think there.
You
I
know?
just think there are so many. It's another topic. But there's just so many ways that people connect that aren't sex, and we shouldn't mistake the intimacy of those interactions. Yeah, like some of the times I feel closest with my partner are like playing video games or watching TikTok or just chatting. Way closer than I often feel having sex, because it's just in the context of that interaction. Sometimes certain activities are really special.
Absolutely. Meissa, do you feel like there was ever a moment, have you had a moment that you could pinpoint, like a mindset shift between going, oh, it's not rejection, it's someone respecting their body autonomy?
I was just going to talk about that, to be honest. I was just going to double back that I really love the reframing of rejection, because I feel like someone withdrawing consent is not inherently rejection. There can be so many reasons someone can withdraw consent. I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I don't want to do this anymore, I'm bored. You hopefully don't want to be bored, but you know what I'm saying? There's a lot of reasons that don't have to do with the other person. A lot of the time, I think people have their own lives going on, they have their own things going on. And a lot of the time, like, I will know most of the time, you'd hope, obviously, unless you've crossed someone's boundary you're unaware of. So a lot of the time, if someone's reacting in a certain way, it's not about you. It is something about them.
I think also something I would like to reinforce is the understanding of men that you can also withdraw from sex. You can withdraw. Like lots of different things that you feel pressured into doing as a boy because the expectation is that you're just this sex hungry animal. Then it's all that you want all the time. Actually, you can also say no. You can also decide to stop doing things. You also have that agency, and maybe being in touch with that agency will help you better empathize with other people as well, to also be able to respect their consent. I think that's important. We have to look within to be able to empathize with others.
Yeah, we've touched on that in a few podcasts. I think that if you don't have that respect for yourself, you're not going to have it for others. And I want to mention again how much I love hearing this and how much I wish I heard it as a young man. And all of the way you're putting everything, it's so nice to hear. And I hope it makes a huge difference for people. And I think it will. And so I think that might be a nice place to go for our final bit of advice. I've got sort of one question left for each of you, so no pressure. But Meissa, what advice would you give to young mob who are navigating consent for the first time?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is having respect for yourself. I think a lot of marginalized people can feel that they have less of a voice to stand up against something, because they could be happy that someone is even doing something with them, or like that they're like, oh, I should just be happy that someone's looking at me, so it doesn't matter. But I think, like, yes, it does. It does matter. If you don't do something, you shouldn't have to. Like, you're a person like everybody else. But asserting those boundaries and don't let someone's expectations of you dictate what you do. Like, you should voice how you're feeling and that you matter, and the things that you the things you want to do at the time and the way you feel matters the most, and you are able to voice that, and you don't have to worry about someone else in the scenario, what they think about. It's like, your consent matters and how you feel in a situation does.
That's amazing advice. Wow, thank you. Georgia, you've shared so much today, and thank you for that. But is there anything about consent we haven't really covered that you'd like to touch on? Any final pearls of wisdom?
This is not something that you listen to one podcast episode and you've done your learning. I
Yeah.
think that this is something that we are constantly learning, and we're learning about it throughout our whole lives. And how can you bring that energy into each sexual experience? Because that's also like a really important thing, that sex is different every single time you have it. And whether, that it can be different even if you've been in a long-term relationship with someone for 40 or 50 years, it will be different every single time. So consent and these practices, we're always learning more about it. So if you feel like this is new information, take a useful piece and apply it, and recognize that it is okay, that all of us will always be learning.
Absolutely. And Campbell, what advice would you give to young people in high school who are wanting to get intimate for the first time?
Oh, that's tricky. Take it slow, as slow as you need to. Be open, communicate. As much as you might think from the movies you've watched that it's not sexy, as you've got 4 grown adults sitting on a couch saying, yes, it is sexy, and it can very well be sexy, and it can be a really fun time. And don't believe what you hear about sex having to be painful, having to be uncomfortable. That's a myth. That's a myth. There are lots of ways that you can have sex, or you can use lube. For some reason, it seems like in heterosexual couples, there's like this real stigma against using lubricant. You absolutely can be using lube no matter who is having sex with whom. So just take it slow, explore, communicate, and be open to take steps backwards as well.
What about if they're feeling sort of pressured to by, the cohort, or just, that high school culture that we've probably all experienced?
Not as many of your friends are having sex as you think.
As they say.
Yeah. I remember having this just like moment in like late year 12, right at the end of the school, where I think we were talking about sex, and all these people I thought were having sex had never had sex before, not even close. And I just realized, I was like, oh, actually, like, not everybody is doing this like I thought they were. And I think you would probably be surprised at like the empathy you'll get from someone by telling them you're unsure. Especially if you're in high school, they're probably really unsure too. And if you say, hey, like, I don't know how to feel about this, I don't know what this is going to be like, I'm a little bit nervous, that might just like open the door for the conversation to happen. They might be feeling exactly the same way. And then you have this really, really nice, clear slate upon which to place the building blocks like of consent of this relationship together. Don't be afraid to communicate your feelings, because you're probably not alone.
Just more incredible advice. I don't know how to express how like grateful I am to sit in on this conversation. Like, I feel like I probably had like a pretty stereotypical, rise through school and as a white guy, and all those, like that feeling that if consent's withdrawn, it's rejection. Like that first feeling that it's rejection is like a systems failing, that I think it's that. And I wish that I heard so much of this when I was younger. And so I can't thank you all enough for being so open and sharing your experiences and your opinions, because it's going to make such a difference. So thank you, Georgia. Thank you, Campbell. Thank you, Meissa.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me up.
And you can go to teachusconsent.com for more information, or Teach Us Consent's Instagram page.
I didn't hear the other podcast, but I think we just made a very, very important piece of media.
Yeah.